Hey everybody, how are you doing? It's your boy DC, Thursday night host of Rogers Out of the Fog.
Right, you kind of got to make your own fun.
Yeah.
Which was a transition for me going into the morning show here.
Proud. Keep doing the amazing work, will you?
They're learning about how to hire people.
20 years of local matter, so join me every Thursday night and see what's going on in the fog.
We can be hurt. We can be bruised. We can be broken. Slowed down, confused, and even numbed. But we can't be defeated. We're built on a foundation that's strong. Our mission, unwavering. And together we'll beat as one.
This is Rogers TV.
Hello everybody, my name is Jason Piercey and this is Out of the Fog. We got a fun one, we got an interesting one, and an eclectic one. We're going to talk to Mr. Kelly Russell, of course been a musician for 50 years in and around our community, has a one-man show called Who Knit Ya, coming up real soon at the Arts and Culture Center. And then we're going to talk to Rhea Rollmann, who is a writer, a journalist, a radio producer, just released a book called A Queer History of Newfoundland. And believe it or not, there's a thread that connects the two of these, and you'll get to hear all about it when we come back right after this. And welcome back to Out of the Fog. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce you to, actually I probably don't even have to introduce you, I imagine most people know who you are, the very talented, the very multi-talented, and the very historied musician, Mr. Kelly Russell. Sir, thank you so much for coming out.
Oh, well, thank you for having me here, Jason. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, well, no, the pleasure's all mine because I'm a music fan, and we just off camera had a little conversation about what Newfoundland music means and what traditional music is and Irish Newfoundland music and how we sort of we didn't take anything from anybody because people brought it here with them across on a boat, and it just sort of developed and evolved, and the development and evolution of your music career, which is solid 50-ish years now.
Yeah, 50 years now with the fiddle.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Yeah.
That has turned into a one-man show.
Yes.
About where you come from and who you are and all that history.
Yeah.
Aptly named.
Yes, it's called Who Knit Ya.
Exactly, of course it's called.
I mean, that's
Who
a
Knit
fairly
Ya.
common Newfoundland expression, right?
Incredible, yeah.
Yeah.
So give us just a quick synopsis of what that show's about.
Well, in Who Knit Ya, I'm casting way back to the early days. In fact, I start with my childhood and how I learned piano from my mother, and then in my teenage years took up guitar playing. I had an electric guitar. I was going to be a rock star. That was my was my ambition, right?
I think by most people's measures, if they were aiming for rock stardom and they ended up with your musical career, I think they'd probably call it a win.
Yeah, I did it with a fiddle though, not with a guitar.
Yeah.
Which is a little different.
Do you still have that guitar?
I do not, no. I owned a Fender Telecaster, actually, a nice white one. I'm sad that I sold it because it'd be worth something now.
It would be, yes.
Yeah, but I traded in the guitar for a fiddle.
I mean, I'm a little bit irritated by the fact that you don't have that anymore, but I suppose given what happened with the fiddle, it worked out okay.
I can be forgiven.
Yeah. So the show sort of tells the story of way back when leading up to?
Yep. Yeah, I get into like the first band that I ever played in, a little known group called Rakish Paddy. Although you would recognize one name our lead singer in Rakish Paddy was a person named Tommy Sexton.
No way.
From Codco, yeah.
Yes.
Tommy was 16 years old at the time. I was a couple of years older. I was 18, and we started a band, kind of a folk rock. We were kind of the first folk rock band. We were doing cover versions of Fairport Convention Steel Ice Band bands out of England. But that didn't last very long because Tommy was really busy with stuff.
Yeah.
Codco and that.
Yeah.
So I guess you could say my first real band I was an original member of Figgy Duff.
Yeah, and we've got some photography here.
Yeah.
Correct? Can I take a look at some of this?
Yes, absolutely, yeah. That's a picture of Figgy Duff from 1976. That's the original lineup of the band there. Wow. Yeah.
And if we could just go through who's in this photo here for the audience.
Yeah, you want to go left to right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, on accordion there, that's Art Stoyles. Next to Art is Dave Panting. Then we've got Pamela Morgan, Philip Dinn, Noel Dinn, and yours truly.
And yours truly, right there. That hat, those jeans, you're killing it. You're killing it, Kelly. And of course, you've got your show happening. I believe Pamela's got something going on too.
She does. Yeah. She's got the White Fleet Suite show coming up this week, and I'm following close on her heels. Now she's up in the main theater. I'm down in the lower level, the Barbara Barrett.
Let's not get into that. That doesn't much matter. That doesn't much matter. Do you have that fiddle?
That particular fiddle, no, I do not. That fiddle, we won't go into that story, but that fiddle was removed from my possession, unbeknownst to me at the time.
Oh,
but I have another one which is much better sounding than that one.
Good,
now, so
good.
Not a big loss.
No,
we say.
we'll lie though. We'll say that it's the one in the photo. So who do we have here?
This is a photo of the Wonderful Grand Band, or WGB.
So I'm aware of your career and aware of a lot of places that you played, but somehow it slipped me that you were part of the Wonderful Grand Band.
Yeah, I wasn't on the hugely popular TV shows of the early 80s. I had left the band in 1980, but from 78 to 80, I was an original member of the Grand Band, and people may remember the shows that we used to do at the Strand Lounge. In fact, in those days, there were 3 strands. I don't know if folks remember that. There was a Strand in the Avalon Mall, of course, but there was also one in the Village Mall, and one down Atlantic Place for a number of years. There were 3 of them.
I wonder if that's where the name Strand came from, because it's like something that runs through something else.
I don't think so, because originally there was the one, and then they expanded into 3. But it didn't last that long. It went back to being 1 again after that. Yeah. But I was in the Grand Band from 78 to 80. We did a TV show called The Root Cellar.
Oh yeah.
And that was kind of a precursor to the hugely successful WGB show.
And Who Knit Ya touches on this and all this.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'll be telling stories about the early days with Figgy Duff and the early days with the Grand Band and spending time in Toronto. And Ron Hines and I were good buddies. You know, we shared an apartment together for a couple of years, and we hung out together quite a bit.
And speaking of Ron Hines, we were chatting off camera just a little bit, and about Newfoundland music, and you mentioned like one of the greatest Newfoundland songs of all time is Sonny's Dream.
Of course.
But it's not really a Newfoundland song. There's no fishing nets, there's no fog, there's no, right?
But it's written by a Newfoundlander.
But it's written by a Newfoundlander.
Yes,
And I happen to, I don't know, I guess it's just in good conversation, I kind of wanted to one-up you a little bit. So I had heard that the single most covered song of all time by recording artists is, of course, the Beatles' Let It Be. But number 2 is Sonny's Dream.
And then I one-upped you.
And then you were like, yeah, I was the first guy to record the first cover of it.
Yeah. Well, you can't call it a cover because Ron sang it.
Ron
was in the band, so it doesn't qualify as a cover. Yeah, the first recording of Sonny's Dream was 1978 on the first Wonderful Grand Band album.
That's amazing. Yeah. So this show, it's from the 6th to the 10th of November. Yep. At the Arts and Culture Center, so they can contact their box office for tickets. And music, stories.
Yep.
Some laughs, I imagine.
Oh, there'll be some laughs, yeah. And it's not all me talking. I play a number of instruments, the instruments that I've learned to play over the years. So there'll be fiddle music. You know, I learned from my mentors, Rufus Ginchard and Emile Benoit.
Real,
So I got it right from the source. And you know, I wrote down all their music in notation, and now there's dozens and dozens, well, we might even say hundreds of younger musicians now in Newfoundland who play those tunes, and those tunes are accessible and available to them because I learned them and wrote them down and recorded them. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So, how long? This might be impossible to answer. The answer might be 50 years. How long have you been working on this concept, this show?
Well, I suppose in one sense you could say all my life, or at least all my career. You know, there's a lot gone on in the 50 years that I've been at it. But for this particular show, we're taking this out to schools.
Yes.
So it's an educational project, and it's been funded by the Newfoundland Labrador Arts Council, to whom we're most grateful. Directed by Fabian O'Keefe. So Fabian and I have been working on this. He's a significant name in theatre and in education here in the province. So Fabian approached me a year or so ago and said, you know, would you be interested in doing a school tour? I think that, you know, you've got lots of material that would be of educational value as well as entertainment value.
Of course, yeah.
So we've been working together. And
it's a good way to hook them. If it's entertaining and it's funny and they are also getting something out of it, that's a good way to increase the productivity and the effect.
Yes, it's important for a young audience like that, you know, kids in school to enjoy what they're what's being presented to them, and if they're enjoying it, then they'll take it all aboard and learn something from it.
Well, I'm excited for the show. I'm going to do my best to get out because I'm going to try and get out because tickets are limited. It is from November 6th to the 10th, Arts and Culture Centre. Who knit ya, Mr. Kelly Russell? Thank you very much, sir.
My pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will be right back after this. And welcome back to Out of the Fog. Okay, get ready for what I think, I'm just watching your face as I say this, is going to be one of my favorite conversations of the season, and we're only at the beginning of the season. I would like to introduce you to Rhea Rollmann. Rhea, hi. Thank you very much for coming. Writer, journalist, author, radio producer, historian. Can we call you a historian now?
I would be honored.
Yeah? So I have a book here that you just released very, very recently through Engine Books called A Queer History of Newfoundland. And there's a whole lot about this that we've spoke about like off camera that I find incredibly fascinating, and I think everybody's life would be better if they had some context and read this book. So first, let's start with why you put this together, what it is, and how that journey's been. We'll start there.
Okay. Well, I guess working as a journalist over the years, I've encountered bits and pieces of Newfoundland's queer history over the years in different archives, records, you know, writing stories, researching stories. And it always struck me that, you know, there's an incredible story here that ought to be told. You know, there's such a rich queer history in this province. And I always kind of dreamed of pulling it all together, putting it in one coherent place where we could see it.
So this has been something that's been on your mind for a long time.
It has, yeah. It's been in the back of my mind for several years. And a few years ago, actually when the pandemic hit, and suddenly life changed, we had a lot more spare time. I decided I would do that.
Have a project, do something that's important to you. Like pull yourself through an otherwise probably kind of dark time for a lot of us, being locked up, so to speak.
Absolutely, yeah. It gave me some real focus. So I spent the past 3 years really intensively working on it. Initially, it was going to be an archival-based history, look at historical records, just kind of put together the chronology of queer activism and community building here in Newfoundland. But the more I worked with those archives and records, the more I realized, there was inconsistencies, there was gaps. It was hard to figure out what this history actually looked like. And I realized I needed to start reaching out to the people who were part of that history.
Okay.
So I started trying to hunt down some of the activists from the 70s, the 80s, mentioned in newspaper articles.
See, that can't be particularly easy to find those people, or to know who they are. And then to know where to get them, and then so that's what makes this very journalistic, as opposed to because you're telling the story, but you're doing it from a journalism perspective more than like a piece of non-fiction literature would be.
Yeah, when I started, I kind of struggled with how was I going to approach this topic. I thought about approaching it as a more intellectual, study, but I decided as a journalist, I wanted to tell the story. I wanted to approach it journalistically. So that's what I did. And it went, initially I thought it would be mostly archival based. In the end, it was a lot of archival research, but almost predominantly a community oral history even.
Interesting.
So I did close to 150 interviews with people. You're right, hunting them down, finding folks. In some cases it was easy, some are still activists. In other cases it was tremendously difficult. A lot of cold calls and messages to Facebook accounts trying to find folks. But
kind of like how I found you to talk about this, just a cold message to a Facebook account, be like, hey, you don't know me.
You didn't happen to be doing this in 1985, did you?
Yeah, right. So for a little bit of context for the audience, because we're talking about documenting the queer activism and the queer history of part of our province of Newfoundland. Can we just sort of define for people what that means?
Sure. I think terms are important, and there are a lot of terms that are used for fairly similar concepts. So some of the historically in the 80s, 70s and 80s, a lot of activists would talk about gay and lesbian. That would be kind of the term used for non-normative sexual identities.
But even the
today,
word normative is not really appropriate anymore, because it implies that this is normal, this is abnormal, as though there's almost right and wrong. And it's very difficult to find the language to understand and explain those things. And that's part of the reason why I said that I think everybody would be better off in life in general to have the context of what, through some of this, is educational for those outside of any queer community, just because you need the language to be able to think properly about things. And if you're saying that a trans woman is not normative, I'm saying, like, you're not normal, and then I am normal, so I'm somehow superior, or like, that's such an absurd construct.
Absolutely, yeah. I fully agree, and that's one of the reasons why I like the term queer. We'll often hear today, we'll hear the acronym 2SLGBTQIA+, which is what the federal government.
Complicated.
Yeah.
It's hard.
And there are pros and cons, I think, to each of these terminologies. I personally, and I have a big discussion in the book about what the different terms are, why I chose the terms I use. Personally, I like queer because the word has been around for centuries. Since the 80s, it's kind of been adopted by a lot of folks in the community as a more expansive umbrella term, which can mean, non-normative sexual or gender identities, but it can mean a whole lot more.
Sure.
And it can also, kind of challenge this idea that anything is normal.
But inherent in that, even though, so this is where the topic gets so difficult. Inherent in that, you are putting a bunch of people into a community that fits under a non-normative definition and calling it queer. But inside that group, there might be individuals who don't really identify with the word queer because of their life and what it means to them, and they might specifically be like not in that space. So like it kind of, in an attempt to be as inclusive as possible, you inadvertently isolate people, the very people that you're trying to include, and it's remarkably intricate and complicated, and that's why I wanted to have this conversation, because we need the language to understand so that the people we care about feel safe to kind of be who they are.
Absolutely. Yeah, you know, one of the challenges queer activists had in the early 70s when they started forming organizations here in the province was this question of, you know, well, who is a member of the queer community? Who do we represent? Who are our responsibilities to? Whose rights are we fighting for? This was a question that these organizations struggled with. For example, you know, now, it's important to also contextualize. Remember, there were a lot of very restrictive laws.
Yes.
Homosexuality was only decriminalized in 1969. So you would have cases where men who would be arrested for having sex with other men, but they didn't identify as gay, they didn't identify as queer, they were simply a lot of men who had sex with men and didn't want to identify as part of the queer community. Whereas you had other people
Which if it was illegal, and there were legal repercussions for it, it would make sense. Like, I don't know, I don't want to just be like out myself as a criminal. Like, as silly as it is to conceive that would be criminal activity.
Yeah.
So of course they would have a hard time associating with that community.
I think too, there's a question of how people see themselves. You know, do you know, what do you see as
confident?
Yeah, and what do you see your identity as? So that's one of the important things as well, I think. You know, there's one of the myths that I really wanted to challenge in the book. I think there was this myth that in Newfoundland and Labrador that it's a traditional conservative culture. You know, we always hear these terms, you know, that it's a place rooted in traditional values. You know, these very vague terms. But
what does traditional values mean?
Exactly. I read a news article the other day talking about the Bible Belt of Newfoundland, and you know, what does that mean? What are you supposed to? How are you supposed to act if you live in the Bible Belt of Newfoundland? I think these ideas are often used to try to, you know, they're a mechanism of control. They're kind of this informal way of trying to influence your behavior. The fact is, like in this supposedly traditional culture, Newfoundland, there were all throughout the province, in the most rural corners, there were people having incredibly complex sex and gender lives. So yes, they might go to church every week. They might, you know, present to their church community in a certain way, but then they go home and they're having incredibly complicated sex and gender lives and identities.
I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine who used to work for a large storage unit business. So you rent out a storage unit for you know, a month at a time with your belongings there, just because you didn't have space in your own home. And she told me a story. She was there for not quite 10 years. Said every day that she worked there, the same man in his business suit drove into his unit and left as the same woman every day for almost 10 years. So that person showed up to their imagining, I can just imagine what it's like to force yourself to be a human that you're not, and like how miserable and how uncomfortable you'd have to be. Like to go in there and have a moment where they got to be their own human, and it have to be such a secret that the only person that knew was the girl that worked on the desk of the storage business.
Absolutely.
And every day for nearly a decade. And yet we look at some of the most famous Newfoundlanders of all time, and so many of them would likely identify as, whether they use the word queer or not, being in some form of that community.
Absolutely. Yeah, and there were so many stories like that that I encountered when I was doing this research, doing these interviews. And, it's sad because as much as that might have provided a space for people, it was also so restrictive and led to a lot of pain. It led to deaths. A lot of people left the province because that's a difficult way to live.
So you need anonymity almost.
Yeah.
Then you don't, or you shouldn't, but you feel like you do because, right? So I feel like that's a decent segue. So you wrote this. It's based on the 20th century. So Rhea, you yourself are a trans woman, and you went through, just by definition of being a trans woman, you went through your own progression to become the version of yourself you always knew you were. And I can't imagine how that went, how it felt, or what it was like. But it occurs to me that had you read this in high school, your life may have been different somehow?
I think so, yeah. I growing up in the 80s and the 90s in Newfoundland. We weren't exposed to this language, these ideas in school, and that made things, that didn't mean that there were not. There were so many trans and queer and gay and lesbian and all kinds of kids. There always have been here in Newfoundland and Labrador. It's just that when you're not educated, you're not presented these ideas and concepts, you don't know how to understand yourself. You experience a lot of confusion, and that can lead to a lot of hurt and bullying. And that's what so many kids experienced in our schools in the 80s and 90s, and until we started to improve our school system. Doing this research, I encountered a lot of stories like my own, and people who left the province, and having those role models. I encountered role models, people who grew up the same time I did in Newfoundland, I never knew about, and it was really inspiring to hear their stories and how they approached their lives. I think if I had had that growing up, it would have made things a lot easier. Certainly would have changed a lot for me, yeah.
I appreciate you taking the time to come and talk about your book, and also to talk about your life to a degree, because I would like that to be something that people can take as motivation for, like, the value of this. Like, you don't have to be queer to read this book. Right? So, Rhea, thank you very much for coming. Thank you for writing it. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back after this. And welcome back. So, that common thread I was talking about, if you're looking at the queer history of Newfoundland, the wonderful grand band with Tommy Sexton and Kelly Russell, there's zero chance that does not come up. So that's what I was talking about. And when it comes to gender identity, right now, people are saying that, like, there's people coming out of nowhere saying that they're non-binary just because this is popular now. Well, do you know what we also said? When we stopped forcing kids to write with their right hands in elementary school, all the left-handers came out of the woodwork. We didn't create them, they were always there, just like people who associate with the queer community. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
If you have a comment about this program, we'd love to hear it. Email or call us, or send us your feedback through social media.
It isn't the heavy trays that make the job difficult, or the fast pace you need to keep up. It's not working another double because someone called in sick. What makes the job tough is the